Okay, Marty, we're officially live. No viewers yet.
Oh, I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see a number up in that corner. I gotta know
Theoretically,
I'm talking to somebody.
theoretically, we're on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter/X. We have viewers on X. We have viewers on Facebook. We have Doreen commenting on Facebook.
Boom. Brent, we're coming tonight. We're coming live from. We're always live. That's the concept of a live stream. But
Yes,
tonight we're coming live from Salt Lake City. I am Salt Lake City, Utah. Is this what it's like to do live stream? It's 6 p.m. here. It's not like
I know.
it's
Yeah.
not 8 p.m. This is crazy. This is bananas. I'm like a whole nother person at 6 p.m. I had a hot pot for dinner. I just walked across the parking lot. There's a hot pot place. Like I'm flying high. Have you had hot pot, Brent? Are you a hot pot guy?
No, but I'm just imagining everyone right now searching hot pots in Salt Lake City and figuring out where you are so they can
Oh
come crash
no.
the live stream.
Oh no. The hotel room door is barred and locked. Um,
Brian
yeah, so
has
we're
commented from YouTube and Emily from X. So we have comments coming in from all platforms, viewers on all platforms. We're
oh,
rocking, Marty.
that is just so good. Well, I am here in Salt Lake because I am at the beginning of the Wild Wild West tour. Do you have, do you want to show people all the fancy details on the website, Brent?
I have the giant mouse pointer and I'm ready. Tomorrow you will be in Salt Lake City at Liberty Park. Where in Liberty Park? We don't know yet.
We don't know. I'm going to try to shoot for the little gazebo on the island because that looks awesome. But I've been told this is a busy park. So I don't know if it's going to be open, but I'm going to go try to get it. And if not, I'm going to like put on social media. So find me on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and I'll tell you where I'm at. Come find me.
Yep. Then you're in Bend. Nothing really happening there. Something happening, but not really anything happening. But you'll be there.
Nothing public.
Then back to southern Idaho. Got a few spots there. I don't know. I don't know if McCall people consider themselves southern Idaho, but it's below the Panhandle, so that's what I'm going with. Then you're up here on the Palouse with me. Spoiler alert, I'll probably be at this meet and greet. Then you're up in Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Spokane area.
Yep.
I'm going to try to show up for that one, Spokane people. I'm going to try really hard, but we'll see. Then you're down in Western Washington, and then over in Western Washington. Western Washington, I'm trying to be as generous as possible with all of these geographical descriptions. I don't know if Yakima Valley people consider themselves to be in Western Washington, but if you slice the state right in half and kind of use the Columbia River, then they're over there. So, we're
I
being
have
squishy.
been I have been told, Brent, that anything to the east of the pass, what's the pass there? Uh,
Snoqualmie.
Snoqualmie Pass is, I've already
Yeah.
been lectured, but I said, hey, I trust Brent Billings. He's a stickler for geographical details.
I'm just trying to keep the schedule as compact and understandable as possible. There's a lot of stops on this tour.
I'm with you. I'm with you. All right. Yep. Sounds good. Okay. Well, there's the deets for that, everybody.
Oh, and hey,
We're
while
going to
we're
jump
here,
into, yeah,
next month's
yeah.
Q&A. Look at that.
Next month's Q&A. Wednesday, May 21st. It's going to be Josh Bosse. I'm going to still be on the Wild Wild West tour. I'm just going to let Josh take it that month. You met Josh a year ago, give or take. He's one of the co-hosts on the Baylaw podcast that you meet in season 6 and beyond. Right now, we're recording and producing his session 9 series on the book of Ecclesiastes, so that's coming. So Josh is going to take our May live stream Q&A. That is at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, Wednesday, May 21st. All right, we got to get rolling, Brent. We have so many questions. I don't know if I'm going to get through them all because I'm going to stay committed to like interacting with our live folks as well. So Brent's going to drop in live comments here and there as he gets them. So we're just going to see. I take it as a personal challenge to get through all this stuff. We do these live streams because we love questions. We love to create space to ask questions. We love to think critically. We love to reinforce that it's okay to ask questions. We love to hopefully model on our better days what it's like to respect people's questions, to receive them graciously, even when we don't like a question, or even when we don't even think it's a good question, or like, what does it mean to receive those things with a posture of, you know, loving curiosity? So that's what we try to do here. So we got a whole list. I'm diving in. Question number one comes from Dwayne. You got anything you got to say, Brent? Looks like you're trying to interrupt me.
Oh no, I'm just excited to hear your 6 p.m. Salt Lake City energy. Get through these
Oh
questions.
man. Oh man. I'm so ready.
Go for it.
All right. There we go. Dwayne, all the way back in February, asked us a question. Said in episode 87, which is titled John Grafted, session 3, you were talking about the I am statements of Jesus, but you didn't mention John 8:58. Before Abraham was, I am. Is there a reason why you did not include this as an I am statement? That's a good question, Dwayne, and there is. When I come down to the I am statements, I traditionally identify them as the image driven, I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. Like there is an image connected to the I am. People can get really wacky and crazy with the whole I am mechanic. I am is just a regular, like Jesus could have said like I am going to get lunch, and people would like freak out and make it an I am statement. And that's just not a proper use of looking at that mechanic. Now the one you bring up here is kind of like middle of the road. Like it's not really one of the great I am statements for me, but I do believe that Jesus is playing and toying with the whole idea of Hanani. Is Hanani the same thing as the I am statements? No, but yes, it's a cousin. I could have included it. I just usually like to make it nice and clean. 858 is kind of an outlier. We could have dealt with it, but I like to stick with the seven. And when I do that, it's seven. So I mean, like, how great is that? I am the vine, bread of life, good shepherd. I am the door. I am the resurrection of the life. I'm missing one, the light of the world. So all of those are driven by an image, and so that's why I did that for that series. But good question, really good question. Hunter comes at us with a question. He says, love Hunter, one of my good friends, been to Israel and Turkey with us. Hunter says probably way too nuanced for a Q&A. It's a Ben Casperson quote right there. We call these, instead of Q&As, because it's really not about the answers, we call them Q&A. Yeah. Q&A. It's probably too nuanced for a Q&A, but can you speak to the tension between forgiveness but not going back to an abusive situation to avoid further harm? The whole idea of forgiving but not forgetting. Um, and knowingly stepping into situations where you quote take up your cross like Jesus. Most of the apostles in the early church folks and today have lived that out often all the way unto death. So how do you balance that? And it's a really good question. And I love that you use the tension. You spoke to your very first statement, Hunter. You said probably way too nuanced. And nuance is the right word here. So there's always usually a principle. There's a foundational principle that we're trying to learn. And the moment you get beyond kind of the base application of whatever principle we're dealing with, you're going to bump into nuance. And that nuance requires what I would call wisdom. To quote Rachel Held Evans, wisdom isn't just knowing that something is true, it's also knowing when it's true. And that's a great statement here for your question. There's a principle that's true, but wisdom will also help you discern when that truth is true. which gets complicated and squishy, and we hate it when things get complicated and squishy, and we would prefer them to fit in nice, perfect categories and boxes. We gave some resources out somewhere along the way when we spoke about forgiveness. I recommended, and I know every time I recommend this name, everybody freaks out. I get it. But I recommended Rob Bell in his early podcast had a series on forgiveness. He called it the Forgiving Flow. I think it was 5 parts. And one of the episodes, he dealt with this question pretty directly. It's one of the reasons why I recommended that series. It was because I thought he had some really good things to say. Like sometimes the most loving, forgiving thing we can do is set up clear boundaries because some people don't have the tools. Some people struggle with mental illness, different things they might struggle with. And so clear boundaries are what enable that person to flourish without being destructive, to find a way. And so those boundaries are super key. And understanding that certain people, just because you forgive doesn't mean you go back to an abusive situation, because that would, remember, the goal is always shalom. The rabbis talk about that, shalom and wholeness. Anything that disrupts that shalom is righteousness and justice bring us closer to shalom. So if you picture that idea of going back to a destructive situation, it keeps breaking the shalom. That's not righteousness and justice, because righteousness and justice bring those things back together. Forgiveness is a part of how you bring those things back together. But sometimes to get that shalom back in place, you're also going to need boundaries. Part of what I have been learning as I've been trying to be trained in trauma-informed care, dealing more in trying to understand things like abuse, words like clarity, choice, consent. These are words that are starting to take like front stage in my vocabulary in order to help me find the wisdom that's in this nuance. So there's a principle here. There's a principle of forgiveness. Remember, here's another thing to be thinking of as you try to discern the wisdom of this nuance. Remember that, pay attention to where the message of forgiveness is coming from. If you're being told to forgive from the top of a power pyramid, that's the wrong direction. Jesus was speaking from the bottom, from the underbelly. Jesus was speaking from the margins as a part. When Jesus spoke forgiveness in a Roman world of oppression, he wasn't speaking as a Roman telling the Jews to forgive the Romans. He was speaking as a Jew to his fellow Jews who were being oppressed by an oppressor, talking to them about the what the important place that forgiveness was going to play in their own hearts from the bottom side of that conversation. When you're being told to forgive from the top side of that power dynamic, that's going to be an indication you're probably dealing with something more akin to abuse. But when somebody from the inside, from the bottom, from the underbelly is speaking of forgiveness, that has a completely different ring to it. It's part of the reason why we look to voices like Martin Luther King Jr., where his voice was coming from. And that's why it's so weird when it gets hijacked or appropriated and moved over here to another conversation. That's part of the wisdom. That's part of the nuance of what we're talking about there. I'm probably going to have to talk for about 20 more minutes to make that make any sense. So I'm going to move on. Thanks, Hunter, for your question. Denise says this. In podcast 96, which happened to be titled, But I Say Unto You, she has some questions. In turning the other cheek, what was the cultural meaning? Is that equivalent to a verbal insult? If it is, does Jesus say to take the insult and offer yourself for another without giving a verbal defense? Second, about taking an oath. I had someone tell me that any kind of oath is wrong, including taking an oath of office to defend the Constitution as an elected official. That's very Anabaptist theology. Denise, the Anabaptist theology takes that line of reasoning with oath. I'm not going to say that's right or wrong here on a live stream. That's not the place I'm going to take. Is that what Jesus is saying? And I'm not going to come down on a ruling there. Under the murder paragraph, Jesus says, if you call someone a fool, you're in danger of hellfire. What does that mean? We actually just covered this in season 9. L. Grover Fricks just did an episode in the Talmudic Matthew series talking about the murder and the hellfire passage. I thought there was a ton of insight in that episode. I would recommend listening to that. Um, Striking the cheek. Let me go back to that one. That's not Jesus isn't using that as a metaphor. Like he's talking about the unjust violence that his audience experiences and endures. He's talking about literal striking of literal cheeks. He's talking about literal abuse at the hands of the powerful, the Roman soldier, the social class system where you had Epicureans and Decurians and and then you had freeborn and you had slaves and their culture had all kinds of, we're talking about more literal, more physical abuse, not just the metaphor of insult. I think it extends, the principle extends to some of those other places. But Jesus is speaking to very literal experiences of injustice and calling them to answer those moments, not with passive pacifism, not with redemptive violence. He's calling them to some creative, revolutionary third way. Um, and so those are more literal situations that he's speaking into and out of when he gives those teachings. And again, I think Anabaptist theology, it sounds like, is part of maybe some of the voices that are shaping, um, maybe some of the theology that shaped some of the voices that are speaking to you. Um, I have a deep appreciation for a lot of Anabaptist theology. I'm not going to say yes or no to how they split the atom here, the theological atom, but there are lots of ways to read that. But in context, Jesus is really having a more literal conversation there. But check out that session 9 episode. I'm sure Brent's probably linked it in the comments. Maybe it hasn't even come out yet. I could be remembering something we recorded and haven't released, but I think we released it. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure Brent's telling you all this stuff in the comments.
You are talking about a couple different episodes. Which one is it? The one that you did with Al?
I believe so. And we talked about Raqqa, you fool,
Yeah. Okay.
murder.
That's episode 439. I'll put the link in the comments.
Boom. There you go. Yep. Excellent. All right. There's a live question here from Betty. My Bema partner and I have just started session 3. Can you tell me when the Pharisees actually saved Jesus? Luke, the Gospel of Luke, I believe. I would have to search. You're getting me with a live question, Betty, so I didn't have a chance to prepare this. I believe maybe both of them. The really direct one is when the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, Herod's trying to kill you. You need to get out of town. And Jesus says, you go tell that fox, blah, 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 blah. But people always say, like, well, the Pharisees are disingenuous. No, the Pharisees are literally trying to help Jesus, like they're trying to say. And Jesus is trying to confront their own perspectives of, I think the other two are a little bit less direct and a little bit less clean, Betty. It might be me stretching a little, but like when they're arguing in the Sanhedrin. Um, and I mean, one of those is in the book of Acts, but the other one is in the Gospels. And there's a reference at the end. It's like the final week of his life. And then I think there's another more indirect reference as well somewhere, but the most direct one is the one that I just spoke of there in Luke, where they say, Herod's trying to kill you, you need to get out of here. I say that in session 3 because we have to stop using, in fact, there's an addendum video in the Pharisee episode. Please watch the addendum video that's in the show notes. Because we have turned Pharisee into a derogatory term. And that is historically like very inaccurate, and it leads to a lot of anti-Semitism in theology. The Pharisees were a diverse group, and many Pharisees agreed with Jesus, sided with Jesus. Um, and so part of what I try to do in session 3, and I didn't do a good enough job, and that's why there's an addendum video in the show notes, is I tried to Jesus is a Pharisee. That's what part of us Jesus is a Pharisee. He's operating in the world of Pharisees. He's using the methods of Pharisees. He is in the camp of Pharisee. He is a Pharisee like this. He's challenging a worldview. He's operating within a worldview, his own worldview, to challenge it in the ways that it's gone astray. He's speaking from the inside, not from the outside. And if you want the really good source, it's going to be an academic source. But Amy Jill Levine wrote a book called Pharisees, something something subtitle. But Pharisees by Amy Jill Levine is a great work. Brent says that is Luke 13. Go tell that fox. The verse prior to that verse is going to be, the verse where they say you need to get out of here if Herod's trying to kill you. It's not that they're trying to get rid of Jesus. It's not that they have some ulterior motive. They're really, as I read that, they're trying to protect Jesus and let him know, like, if you don't leave, I mean, they might want him to leave too, but I don't read it as this ulterior motive. So, good question, Betty. You caught me a little unprepared, but that's the nature of the live question. Good question. Kelsey said this. She said, um, my heart behind this question is more about cultural approach than it is about breaking down the theology. Culturally, how would a Jewish family begin to share the story of the Bible with their children? Is there a basic system, tradition, approach, focus, or method? I'm just looking for some basic takeaways and priorities and approach, not an entire Jewish early education. I would love to learn from the ones who have years of passed down experience of doing this with the Old Testament part of the story. It's a good question, Kelsey. I understand the impulse that where this question comes from. The good news, bad news is that Judaism is just as diverse. It is just as complicated. It's just as culturally nuanced as Christianity. Judaism today, I mean, what we talk about on the podcast is about Second Temple Judaism to the best of our historical knowledge. And so we're talking about a Judaism that was 2,000 years ago. That Judaism doesn't exist anymore. There are some corners of Judaism that share a lot of very similar traits. If you were to grow up in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, you would live in a Jewish neighborhood surrounded by lots of other people that go to synagogue with you. You would have your children the same kind of Orthodox Jewish training. If you lived over in Israel, the Hasidic Orthodox uh, are supported by the governmental welfare system so that they can grow up and study Torah in a way that is somewhat similar to what we study in the podcast. Those are not the general experience of Jews all over the world, and so there's no answer to your question. In the same way that you have in Christian subculture, you have a homeschooling movement. You have people that go to public school. You have people that are very active in church and Sunday school and youth group. You have people, that same kind of diversity is going to be seen in Judaism. Different expressions, different traditions. So there's no quick, easy way to answer that question. And our goal is not to become something else. Our goal is always to steward who we are in the context that God has called us to. I know the impulse you're wrestling with. In my own Jewish family, I wrestle with a lot of oh, what should my kids do? And how should I do this? And do I have to do that? And what does it mean to be consistent? And am I a hypocrite if they don't? I have to realize that my family lives in the year of our Lord 2025. I don't belong to a Jewish community. I belong to an evangelical church. We as a body of believers are doing a certain number of things. 98% of our congregation is not Jewish. They're not asking the same questions. So I have to adapt what my presence and my identity and my pursuit and my faithfulness looks like based on who I am, where I live, at the time that I live, and what God calls me to do. And if that sounds like, well, Marty, you just made it more complicated. I know, and I'm sorry. and that is life. Um, it's the right question. There's just no easy answer. Lexi says, I would love to get Marty's opinion on how the Israelites were in Egypt before the Exodus. How long, were the Israelites in Egypt before the Exodus? I never questioned the 430 years mentioned in Exodus 12:40. But then I was doing some research on the parents of Moses, and I came upon an interesting idea that said, according to the Midrash, that his mother Jochebed may not only been the Hebrew midwife mentioned in Exodus 1:15, Shiphrah, but she's also the daughter of Levi, son of Jacob, and was born just as the family of Jacob was entering Egypt. The story, which I found several sources for, indicates that she, along with her cousin Serach, daughter of Asher, were among the only people who both entered Egypt with Jacob during the famine and left with Moses. I'm attaching a video. Been listening to Brent and Marty for almost 2 years. Deeply value their wisdom and ability. Yeah, Lexi, I agree, and I don't really think there's a whole lot of a debate about this because the Apostle Paul agrees with what this is not a fringe idea. Not only is it not a fringe idea, it's one that the Apostle Paul espouses in the book of Galatians. So in the book of Galatians, I believe it's Galatians chapter 3, Paul is talking about the law and the promise. The law and the promise. And Paul says that there's a promise given to Abraham. So Abraham, think about it, Abraham. The promise given to Abraham is not undone by the law, Sinai, that's given 430 years later. Now, most of us just read that over without thinking about it, but realize what Paul just said. Paul said that Sinai happens 430 years after Abraham and Isaac. That's what he just said. He referenced the promise of Abraham and Isaac and the law given 430 years later. So the 430 years is not in Egypt. The 430 years, and this is not a fringe idea. This is straight out of Jewish tradition, straight out of Jewish midrash. You found a bunch of sources for this because this is the understanding that slavery did not begin in Egypt. Listen, because there's a lesson here. This is good. This is good, Lexi. It's a good question. Slavery didn't begin with our material circumstances in Egypt. Listen, slavery began the moment that we put our trust in Egypt. That was the moment we became enslaved in Egypt. Not just our physical material slavery. We were already slaves in here. That's the Jewish rabbinic tradition. Slavery started in Genesis 15, not in the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus was the culmination of a slavery that began all the way back in Abraham. That's the Jewish understanding. Now, you can argue with that, and that's fine, but please recognize that Paul, the Apostle Paul in your New Testament, takes that exact line of reasoning in Galatians 3. So for me, that settles the debate. I'm with the Apostle Paul. I think they're absolutely correct. So that is a fun question and way to pay attention, Lexi. Live question from Mike Todd Larson. Marty, from your point of view, how do you see the path of repentance? I'm reading a book on Punishable. I think we're probably missing a word there, and it talks about repentance, restoration, reconciliation, or reverse that, repentance, reconciliation, restoration. I'm going to let Brent try to figure out where we talked about this. We've talked about it more than once in the later seasons, Mike. We talked about it in the Hosea episode. I think there's an episode in the Hosea series on repentance. We introduced it at the beginning of our spiritual abuse series in season 6. There is a Jewish idea that I've taught on a few times on the podcast and a handful of times in person at different events, and I've spoken on the process of repentance. Judaism has like a 5, some rabbis will do 7, but there are 5 steps to repentance. There is acknowledging that you've done something wrong. We say confession. There is an acknowledgement of how that wrong has impacted others. So there's not just me saying I screwed up. Step number 2 is saying, I screwed up and this is what happened. This is what it caused. This is the disruption, the destruction. This is how it disrupted shalom. Step number 3 is making any restitution and repair that you possibly can. Some things can't be repaired materially. They're emotional, they're spiritual. But there are many things that can be repaired materially. So making material repair. Number 4 is outlining the plan, what I'm going to do to make sure that I don't reoffend. So notice what I'm doing. I'm admitting I did something wrong. I'm acknowledging how that wrong screwed everything up out loud, in public. I'm making any repair that I can possibly make. I'm acknowledging the steps that I'm going to have to go through to make sure I don't repeat this offense. Because if I repeat the offense, who cares? And 5, I actually change my behavior. And when I change my behavior, that's when repentance is complete. I'm not talking about salvation. I'm not talking about getting to heaven. I'm talking about interpersonal repentance. And that's how that works. Brent's got some episodes. He says Bema 423. He's not sure if it's going to be Bema 242 or 243, but it's going to be somewhere in there. And I agree. I think it's going to be 242 at the end. But I can't remember for sure. But there you go, Mike. Brooklyn says this. Hello, Marty and company. I want to say that right around New Year's, I finished the core sessions, the first 5 sessions. She's a survivor. I got through Leviticus. I also turned several people on the podcast, and they're loving it. Thank you, Brooklyn. I'm glad that you love it. I'm glad that you found other people that love it too. Today I'm writing with a question. I loved how you guys covered the crucifixion and surrounding material. But just now I was reading Acts 2, and a few times when speaking to the crowd at Pentecost, he spoke of Jesus, whom you crucified. But if the chief priests were the ones who did that, I can't imagine they were in that crowd. Why did Peter say that to them? Did he mean that they crucified him figuratively, just as we all do, by our sinfulness? Or is there some other reason? Thanks in advance. It could be, Brooklyn, the last things you mentioned. It could be I wrestle with the same question, by the way. You're asking a question that I too wrestle with when I get to that passage in Acts. It makes me pause and make sure I'm being honest about what's being said. And it could be that what's being said is what you bring up. It has a figurative meaning in the same way that you and I crucified Jesus, they crucified Jesus. Could be that. I don't love that. But I'm going to go back to what you said. I can't imagine that they were in the crowd. I'm actually going to absolutely say the opposite. They're on the Temple Mount. They're on the temple steps. Pentecost happens. A lot of people think it happens in the upper room. It doesn't happen in the upper room. Pentecost happens. The translation is in the house, but the oikos is the Greek word for house, is how a Jew speaks of the temple. So they're on the southern steps. They're on the Temple Mount when this happens. They are literally in the house of the chief priests. They are absolutely around. They're also in the land of the Judean. The Judean is the worldview that supports the Sadducee. It supports the chief priest. The Judean, I don't want to equate Judean and Herodian, but you're thinking in the right way if you think that way. The Judean worldview is at odds with the Galilean worldview of the apostles. So for them to say, you crucified, makes a ton of historical contextual sense. I do think he's talking to the world of the chief priests. I do not think it's far-fetched at all to imagine that on the celebration of Shavuot, there are chief priests and all their cronies on the Temple Mount. And he directs that comment to them and those that support them. That's how I read that. I could be wrong. But that's absolutely who I think he's speaking to. Which means at the end of Acts 2, when people say, they're pierced to the heart and they say, what do we do? That makes that all the more meaningful because they're coming from a worldview that sits on the other side of the theological divide. So do with that what you will. That's how I read it, Brooklyn. I could be wrong. It could be what you read at the end about figurative application. It could be that. Who knows? Darren says this, I was curious if you all could point me to some of your content that would talk about the idea of dying to oneself being a concept of discipleship where you're taking on the image of your rabbi and letting yourself die to better reflect the rabbi. Just curious if these are parallel concepts or if this was a concept in traditional rabbinical training. Also, if you could include with this question, I've heard from traditional sources as well that verbiage like being whole, complete, full in Christ was the verbiage used of a rabbi. I'm not necessarily aware of that, Darren. It could be. There's a lot in my bibliography of the whole rabbinical era that I haven't gotten through yet, and so it's possible I haven't bumped into that. I'm not aware of that. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. Just because I'm not aware of it doesn't mean that that's not completely accurate. I just can't speak to it because I'm not aware of it. There's so much verbiage about being complete in Christ or full or whole. I'm curious if y'all would agree that those are references to the rabbinical process. It's a really good question, Darren. I just don't have anything in my resource list or in my back pocket where I have anything to help there. I love your question. I really do. I think it's a really good one. And I'd love to have some answers to that. I just don't have them. Um, I remember putting this question in the document for tonight, and I kind of did it on purpose because I love to have questions where my answer is I don't know, I don't have a good answer for that. It's a good question. Like contextually, it's a good question. Conceptually, it's a good question. There are some things you're referencing that I've just never heard of, but that doesn't mean who knows? Who knows? So good luck digging up some more stuff there, Darren. Sorry, I can't be a better resource to that one, but it's a good question. It really is. Laura says this. I have a question which you may deem, I love this. She says this might be one of the questions that might make you lose your job. And I was like, oh no. But the question's not bad at all. It's about eschatology. Laura says, do you consider full preterism to be an improper interpretation of the eschatology of Israel? Why or why not? I do not understand why there is such fear surrounding it, and to me it makes the Bible make so much more sense. What do you think of full preterism? Um, First of all, I always hate the designation full anything because it seems to imply that there's this clean category where every last little detail, it just feels like I'm removing critical thinking. I'm a preterist. I don't know if you get to the end of session 4, we go through the book of Revelation. Preterism is Behmah's jam. That fits the hermeneutic of Behmah. We're preterists. Now, there are many nuances that are typical of preterism that I'm not necessarily, but they're nuances. They're like little, this angle, the way that conversation is shaped, this supersessionism that works its way in. Like those are the kind of things that I'm gonna. So I always hate the term full preterist because I don't know what you'll hear if I say, yeah, I'm a full preterist. But my eschatology, my hermeneutic leads me to a more preterist eschatology. And that's pretty obvious when you get to the end of session 4 and listen to our teaching on Revelation. For anybody, I'm not going to take time to do this. Everybody is like, what is preterism? Um, Jump on Wikipedia, look up. There are 4 to 5 general ways to read the book of Revelation: futurist, preterist, historical, dispensational, and somebody splits it out. A great book is Shane Wood. I think he talked about it in his book, didn't he? Did Shane Wood talk about it in Between Two Trees? He has a new book coming out as well on Revelation. I'm going to be reading that and probably recommending it here soon. Anyway, um, you can spend time on Wikipedia figuring out what those things mean. If any of you don't know where Laura's question is coming from or what those words mean, have fun. Good luck. Um, yeah, I'm a preterist, Laura. The other part of your question that makes me pause is you say the interpretation of the eschatology of Israel. That's where I would get concerned of what you understand preterism to be saying in response to Israel. Because if you get to anything that starts to resemble replacement theology, I'm out. I have no interest in partaking in replacement theology. That there's a new Israel, that God moved on um, from. If that's the version of preterism that you sometimes preterism is shaped by replacement theology and deeply seated supersessionism. Again, if you don't know what those words mean, have fun on Wikipedia. But I'm not going to go there. But I am a hermeneutical preterist. Okay. Daniel says, I love the podcast. Thank you for your work. I've been fascinated, and I'm looking into the history of the teaching that Yiscah and Sarai are one and the same, and I can't find any ancient midrash that teaches this. Everything I get comes later and is overwhelmed with Muslim influence. That's very interesting. You have a very interesting Google algorithm, Daniel. Um, would you be able to provide or point me in the direction of the origins of this idea? So we've talked about the Yiscah Sarai thing so much, Daniel. I don't know if Brent is just going to blow up the comments because we just rebooted an episode. That might be the one that's actually prompting your question. We came back in season 6 and did more conversation on Sarah and Yiscah. But I do have a link that Brent's going to share to cut the corner and to answer your question directly. You want reference to where that shows up in the Midrash. The reference is going to be Tractate Sanhedrin. Now, again, if you're going to say Tractate Sanhedrin is too late, I understand why you would say that. I completely disagree as far as the historical conversation it's referencing. But the reference comes straight out of Sanhedrin. Um, uh, the link there is going. That's, by the way, if anybody out there has questions about a feminine character in Torah, a female character of the Hebrew Scriptures, Jewish Women's Archive. That is your resource. You have to go there. All right. If it's a question about a female character of the Bible, go to jwa.org. And up in the corner, you're going to have a little search bar. And you just plug the name into that search bar. I went to jwa.org for your question. I plugged Yiscah into that search bar. Took me 15 seconds, and I had this link that I put in that. It is a treasure trove. You're going to have two main articles that almost always pop up. A synopsis article of who this person is in the biblical narrative, and then another article that goes through a synopsis of the different midrash and legends that surround that character. So you can do a deep dive on that, and there's other articles beyond that. Once you're done with jwa.org, go to chabad.org and do some more searching. You'll pull up some more Orthodox Hasidic links there that will lead you in similar directions. But I always start with Jewish Women's Archive. So there you go. Joe, I know Joe. Joe says, you've mentioned as a rabbi, Jesus would be pointing back to the text. Should we expect the disciples, New Testament writers, or Paul to point back to the Old Testament text and everything they write and say? Everything they write and say? Everything? We'd have to figure out what we mean by that. Every sentence? Every word? Probably not. Every sentence? I don't know. Every paragraph? Yeah. But generally speaking, yes. And I think one of the things we try to do in season 4 is we try to show just how much the Apostle Paul, as one of the main writers of our New Testament, I mean, obviously the Gospels are doing that nonstop. I think the book of Acts does it more than we even realize, but then all of Paul's letters. The more I study Paul, the more I become convinced that Paul is continually riffing on Hebraic text, doing the whole, what we will call pardes, which is a later reference in history, but that whole hyperlinking back to an Old Testament conversation. I think Paul's doing that way more than we. So my short answer to that question would be yes. But be careful like how much you extended that, because I don't mean that. I don't say yes with like a heavy hand. It's like, yeah, generally I think our New Testament writers are doing that. With every introduction to every letter. I mean, I'm not getting crazy about all that kind of stuff, but I mean like the general movements of their teaching and their lessons and their references. I do think that they are often moving in that direction, yes. Graham says, I've been listening to Bema for a bit now and just started session 3. I have been extremely interested in the silent years and who, what, and where episodes. The prophets were a little tough for me. And I think a reason why is that I did not have a ton of context knowledge about the Bible, region of the Bible. With that being said, I'm interested in learning the history of the region of the Bible. Where can I start a journey like that so I can get more context of the Bible and the region? I mean, Graham, you're asking a huge question. There's no book that I'm going to be able to point you to, and everybody's going to find different doorways that they find helpful for this conversation. Like some people are going to read, um, like almost Bible dictionary, Bible atlas type stuff to get a sense of that. I mean, there's a whole section of my bibliography that I'm only about a third of the way through. You can go back to things like Edersheim. He's an old scholar. He his work kind of laid the foundation for so many of the scholars that I end up reading today. So it's way dated. It goes way early. But Edersheim, the life and times of Jesus the Messiah. Now that was an old book, an old text. Um, you could read things like N.T. Wright, the New Testament People of God. You could read Ben Witherington, huge contextual scholar. You could read, I'm trying to think of who Edersheim led to. Another name that often gets tossed around in scholarship from old days. I'm going back to the beginning. I like to be able to go back to the beginning and then walk scholarship forward to see how it's changed and moved. Joachim Jeremias is another name that gets tossed around quite a bit. And again, a lot of their scholarship has been changed as we've learned more stuff they were wrong about, things that scholars disagree with. But it's hard to know where to point you because there's no concise, it's a long journey that you start. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, Graham. Isn't that encouraging? But I mean, that's the journey that I've been on, and I haven't been on it that long. Like I started this journey in 2008. That was when my eyes were opened, and I just started studying. 2008 was a long time ago. It also wasn't that long ago. 2008 was less than 20 years ago. So everything that I'm sharing that has impacted me, that has led to the Bema podcast, that I'm talking about in this live stream tonight, is stuff that any of you could learn over the next 15 years. Um, I did not learn this stuff in Bible college. I learned it after Bible college. Just like anyway, so it's a long journey. It's wide, it's deep, and you have to figure out where you want to go in it. And that's why we're always trying to recommend a gazillion resources in the podcast. Because when you find, like you found something, and unfortunately, the episodes you're talking about don't necessarily have a ton of show notes, which is where your question comes from. It doesn't have a ton of references and resources because it's hard to get it condensed into like, read this book for this, read this book for that. Um, but those are some names that might be able to get you started. N.T. Wright, Ben Witherington. If you want to go way back, you're going to look at Edersheim, Jeremias. Those are names you might find. Jacob says this, hey Marty, on the first John episode and discussion video, you say that John is saying that if something is not in love, it's not truth. I appreciate your viewpoint on this, but I have been wrestling with it and so many questions come up. How exactly is love to be interpreted in your viewpoint? Because the beginning of wisdom is hatred of sin, right? I'm just going to deal with that in passing, Jacob, so I don't circle back around to it. You're quoting something, but it's not, it's an extrapolation of Proverbs, which says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which the beginning of wisdom is the hatred of sin, is usually an extrapolation that many teachers have made from that, not what the text says. A similar concept of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but the fear of the Lord is not the end of wisdom, it's the beginning. So just like my little kids when they were tiny, 2, 3, 4 years old, I taught them to be scared of the stove and the oven. If they're 21 years old and they're still scared of the stove and the oven, that would be weird. So it's the beginning of wisdom, it's not the end. So the fear of the Lord might be the beginning of wisdom, but perfect love casts out all fear, right? So there's a maturing process and a journey that wisdom takes us on. There's a beginning, but the beginning is not the end. And what we do is we act like the beginning was the end, and we keep trying to get people to circle back around to the fear rather than growing in the right direction. But I digress. Jesus in the temple turned over tables, Jacob says. and whipped people, and on plenty other occasions spoke woes and warnings to the teachers of the law, none of which seemed all that loving. Some were loving to one group, but then not to the other. Paul also sent people out of the church for the sake of truth and protect those inside the church, which is the key there, to protect those inside the church. So here's how I'm going to deal with your question, Jacob. It's going to go back to that question that we talked about forgiveness. It's going to be very similar to the forgiveness discussion, right? The question about love. Love is always going to lead to shalom. Love is going to be based on righteousness and justice. Love is going to be pointed towards shalom. If it's breaking shalom apart, it's not love, which is why Paul might look at somebody who's being destructive and abusive and say, it's time for you to leave the room, because the room is about love. And if you're going to insist on being anti-love, we're going to have to ask you to remove yourself, because what we're doing here is love. So it's not love. It's not that they're attacking false doctrine. I mean, they are, but I mean, not like we usually use this weaponized to go after, usually from a place of power, to go after people on the outside who don't think like us, who aren't like us. And that's how we weaponize this whole truth. It's usually, I don't want to keep adding commentary to that because I'm just going to get myself into trouble. But I think you know what I'm getting at. We're going to be about the wholeness, the flourishing, the shalom of all creation. That's what love looks like. If it looks like that, it's truth. And if it doesn't do that, then no matter what we have, it isn't true, because truth would always lead to righteousness and justice. Righteousness and justice always leads to shalom. Shalom would be the place of love. So that's how we would, but your question is a good question, because love doesn't just mean that everything goes. Like no matter what people want to say, no matter what they think, everything's welcome here. Everybody's welcome. No, destructive practices are not welcome here. Abuse is not welcome here. But what's ironic is that this line of thinking that love has to be true in order to be love, is usually used on the top side of a power pyramid to abuse people, which is why I was going so hard in that John episode, to try to undo that. But love doesn't just mean that everything goes, no matter what you want to think, no matter what you want to do, no matter how you want to act. No. Love is going to lead to shalom. And when you're tearing shalom apart, we're no longer dealing with love. So love is not code word for just tolerance at all costs, which is what makes it tricky. Josh, oh man, we're so close to being on time. Brent, we are a little bit behind, but we're so close. Josh says this: I'm in Romans, and back in episode 2, y'all's work on Romans and Galatians so he's doing both. He's listening to Romans and Galatians and stuff. So he's in session 4, but he's also listening to the reboot with some friends, it sounds like. My question is about Bema and apologetics. There's a very different tension between what I've been brought up with in terms of combating unbelievers and even doubters with proof texts and apologetics. And that has their place, but I'm guessing that Bema has wisdom for me here. Quick scenario: my father-in-law has many characteristics of Jesus, but no interest in church life, spiritual life, etc. I can get past church life, as he's probably a little jaded and needs help, but he shared with his wife that one thing he wrestles with are things like the Holocaust, or how my brother-in-law died of cancer at 39 years old. I guess, to use better or Bema language, where is the treasure for him? How does one help him look to God, trust the story and God? I guess deal with those big issues. This is one of this question is substantial, Josh, right? And part of what I'm referencing when I say that is the very tension that's in your question. Like, there's a time and a place for apologetics. There's a time and a place to have answers to certain questions. If somebody wanted to talk about, is the Bible reliable? Is the Bible really reliable? I mean, it's been around for 2,000 years. We could talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. We could talk about how reliable our textual evidence is, whether or not our Bible is accurate. Has it been changed over the ages? Like, there's a time and a place to have some really objective conversations with answers and conversations that would resemble what we would call apologetics. But then there's like a whole nother category. There's a whole nother experience. There's a whole nother thing that you're talking about. And there's no Dead Sea Scroll that undoes somebody's wrestling with whether or not God is just. There's no apologetic or quick reference handbook for whether or not, why did God let my family member die? There will be no proof text for that. And they don't need somebody to explain. And your question has an awareness, like you're self-aware enough to know, like, I feel like there's a time for that, but this is something else. What people need is the presence of God in their life. And this is what the book of Job is about. The book of Job is about somebody that has lost like everything and has big questions that no theology is going to answer. And of course, the folly of the book of Job is that all these friends try to figure out what to say. And their best moment was when they kept their mouth shut and just were present and were the presence of God in that person's life. That's what somebody like your dad or anybody else in your life, they need to be able to see God and brush up against God in surprising places, in people like you, not with the things that they say or the explanations that they give or the Bible verses that they quote, but in the way that they're a Rotenbush, in the way that they're an Engedi, in the way that they show up. Your dad's in a wilderness, right? Is it your father? Yeah. No, your father-in-law, excuse me. Your father-in-law's in a wilderness. Last thing he needs is to be preached at, right? He doesn't need answers. We're not talking about like which Josh McDowell or Lee Strobel books should I get him. No. He's wrestling with who God is. And the gracious, loving God of the universe has routinely shown us in both Old and New Testaments and in the person of Jesus. He knows exactly how to love and meet people like your father-in-law exactly where he is. And he invites us to be that same kind of presence in their life. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Be that kind of a presence in his life. Invite others to be that kind of a presence in his life. He will find, he will see God. Go to the Beatitudes. How many of those Beatitudes are going to resonate with your father-in-law? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who show mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart. We're talking about your father-in-law. And Jesus says, blessed. Jesus announces he's blessed. Not later, not when he gets it all figured out, not when he gets answers to his questions, not when he shows up to church, not when he says, oh, I got my life with Jesus figured out and now I'm back. Nope. Jesus says right now, where he's at, blessed is he. And blessed are you when you pursue those same things to minister to him. Blessed are you when you are a peacemaker. Blessed are you when you are merciful. And it will be difficult and it will be hard. And you will have other Christian voices that tell you you're supposed to be doing this and your father-in-law is far from God and blah, 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 blah. Blessed are those when they persecute you. Those are some passages that come to mind when I think about your father-in-law. He's fine. He is fine. Secure in the love of a God who knows exactly what he wrestles with, who knows what it is, who has suffered in every way. And in this process, as he finds God in different ways, many sons are brought to glory, the book of Hebrews says. It'll be all right. Oh, great. I thought we were on time, and Brent just told me that he moved half a dozen questions after rapid fire response, which
Oh, so
is the segment we're here for.
we're here now.
All right, folks.
Sorry to trick you / disappointment you, but
Man,
so many
what are
good
the chances
questions tonight.
what are the chances we're gonna get done with this list? Becoming slimmer and slimmer the more I go on. All right, we're gonna actually rapid fire response these rapid fire questions. Kendall says, I've been listening for about a year and a half now, and every so often I hear Marty say something like, that's a terrible translation, referring to how a particular type of Bible has misconstrued a meaning. Then I hear about how the Catholics have some books that the Protestants don't have, and the Orthodox Bible is different. Which Bible is a true Bible? Help, I'm so confused. What about the differences between Catholic and Protestant Bibles? Are all those missing book sources that should be read, are they considered holy? Here's what we're going to do, Kendall. Brent's going to put links in the show notes. I've done a couple BEMA FAQ videos. I've done BEMA FAQ videos about canon and the Apocrypha. I've done a BEMA FAQ video, I think, about translations. If Brent doesn't get them on the chat, I will ask Brian to send them to you in the email response that comes to this live stream. But there's 2 BEMA FAQ videos I'm going to give you there to speak to that. Short version, it's okay. It's okay. Studying the Bible is not a static work. It's dynamic. It's about thinking critically. There's no Bible that gets it perfect. Not the Catholic Bible, not the Protestant Bible. It's not about the book orders. It's not about the Apocrypha. It's about studying the Word of God and thinking critically while you do. Janae says this, Marty, I just listened to your podcast 120 about truth and life. I have something in mind for the remez for Peter in the temple tax. This is when Peter catches a fish and there's a 2 drachma coin in its mouth. I stumbled upon Charles Spurgeon's sermon, number 1581, called Silver Sockets, Redemption the Foundation. My thought is that Jesus is teaching Peter about the actual tabernacle that is built through his death and resurrection that is coming. I believe that the temple tax they are talking about in Matthew 17:24 is piloting back to Exodus 30 and 38. I wanted to share this as a possibility. Janae, I just love where your head is at, and I think you're probably right. The temple tax they're directly talking about is the Herodian temple tax, not the one in Exodus. But that you would be thinking about Exodus as a remez, it's brilliant. I love it. And I think it matches some of the other remezim that have been sent to me and other places too. I think it's brilliant. Good job, Janae. I love it. I love people finding remezes. Nathan says this, I have enjoyed the Bema podcast for years. Just recently, I have been pondering the Trinity, and I was wondering if any episodes sort of covered the early Jewish Christian idea of God as one. Is there some resource I could be pointed to? I would appreciate it. Rapid fire response, Nathan? No. We don't have any episodes that cover it. We talk about the history of the councils at the beginning of session 5, but really nothing that dives into that. I don't necessarily have a great recommendation. I kind of recommend Gusto Gonzalez has a series, The History of Christian Thought, and volume 1 of 3 is going to deal with that portion of history. I recommend it if you really want to do that kind of a deep dive. Good luck. Alex says this, I think I found another remez. In Jeremiah 22, it says, woe to him who builds his house on unrighteousness and his upper rooms on injustice. It continues to talk about building houses on evil like injustice and contrast with doing justice and looking for the poor and needy. Based on how Matthew wrote to the Mumsers of how Jesus' Sermon on the Mount was all about loving each other and caring for those who were outcasts or looked down upon, I think the end of the sermon about where we build our houses connects to Jeremiah 22. Alex, I love your idea. Rapid fire response, just like Janae. I love where your head is at. I think you're totally onto something. I love it. Good work. Jessica says, first off, thank you very much for the podcast and the resources that you share. It's been very helpful for the last few years. She found us from the Brent and Sherry Oddcast. Shout out to the Brent and Sherry Oddcast. That's awesome. Just started re-listening to session one. On the topic of making art and knowing when to stop, as someone with an art degree, I would like to chime in. I think your point is valid and very much stands. It would depend on what kind of art you were doing and what you're going for, but accidentally overworking a piece was a common vexation for both me and my classmates in school. There was just a point when the work became stiff or meh or just okay and lost the vitality it would have made that would have made it a really great piece if it wouldn't have been over rendered. The big question was always, when do I stop? When is it finished? Some, like the person you mentioned, will debate, is it ever finished? And a lot of the difficulty with art is there has to be an almost infinite number of choices and directions you could go, which depends on what you want to do. So she just goes on to say, I think it's a great point. Jessica, thank you for sending that in. I love the affirmation, but I even love more hearing your own perspective as an artist and letting you nerd out a little bit about being an art nerd. I love it. I love it. Alex says this. I wanted to share another remez. Alex is finding remezes left and right. Paul is talking a lot about people from Genesis and Romans. I noticed specifically that in Romans 6:12, Paul says that we should not let sin reign in our bodies, which reminded me of what God said to Cain. Sin is crouching at the door, but you must rule over it. The relationship to our sarks continues in chapter 7 when Paul talked about trying to control his sarks. Here's my favorite part. In chapter 8, starting in verse 12, there are many phrases that sound like the fall. Paul says living according to the flesh means we will surely die. Paul says the children of God walk by the Spirit. When Adam and Eve sinned, they heard God walking in the cool of the day, the ruach of the day. He's making all these connections. I'm not reading the whole message here, but just question after question. So basically the remezes from Alex being that Paul's conversation in Romans keep calling us back to early Genesis, Adam, Cain, Abraham, all these. I love it. I love it, Alex. I love it. Jay says this, I've been listening to the podcast for half a year now. I started from the beginning, but jumped to Revelation since my small group was studying chapter by chapter. The person who led the study is either preterist, here's that preterist question again, or partial preterist. He took a lot of info from the commentaries, Bruce Gore, David Chilton. Our leader's view is that it took place in AD 65. It's a popular opinion that Revelation is written during the reign of Nero. However, I believe that you're in the AD 95 in the reign of Domitian. His teachers seem to think the persecution was at its highest during Nero than during Domitian. His long-winded question is, why do I think it's Domitian? For a couple reasons. The Nero persecution was very regional, and it was centered only pretty much where Nero was in Rome. It was not an empire-wide persecution. It would not have spoken to the people of Asia and Asia Minor. It's very odd that John would write about that, being that he's positioned in Asia. The Nero persecution was not an imperial persecution. It wasn't empire-wide. Um, it was a bad persecution if you were where the persecution was. The Domitian persecution, if it happened, as history says it does, was imperial wide, and nothing had as high or as wide of a scope as the Domitian persecution. Now, it's become very popular in scholarship to completely reject that idea that the Domitianic persecution was real, let alone big. But to do that, you have to completely disregard almost all church history. All of the church historians from the first 4 centuries, you have to completely disregard. I'm not comfortable doing that. I completely disagree with that. It's kind of the sexy opinion these days. I completely disagree with that take. And the last reason I would say that, this isn't really a rapid fire response, this kind of got complicated, Jay. The last response I would give you is there are clear references to Emperor Vespasian. So Vespasian was the one who had a mortal head wound, but was miraculously healed. That was Vespasian. If it's Nero, that hasn't happened yet. So it doesn't make any sense that it would be in there unless it's after Vespasian, which would push it into Domitian. So there you go. That's my thinking. Heather says this, I'm from the U.S. but currently living in Iraqi Kurdistan. My husband and I will be visiting Turkey soon and visiting the sites of the 7 churches. I know you take groups to Turkey, and I was wondering if you could share your itinerary with me and any reading suggestions that you give to those that go on your trip. Heather, rapid fire response? No. I don't necessarily have a lot of reading for Turkey. We do a bunch of reading for Israel, as far as like reading. Obviously we read Revelation a lot, as far as biblical reading. excuse me, but I don't share my itinerary because my trips are blind trips. So my itinerary is top secret. I can tell you that we go to all seven churches, and then from there we start moving our way east, and we start talking about Paul and the missionary journeys, and then Christian history. But that's all I'm going to tell you. Sorry. Melinda, I just started listening to Bema, and I love it. I've been reading the Bible all my life and been seeing so many problems, contradictions, just plain strange stuff. I love how Marty says that this is okay. God wants us to wrestle with the text. It's okay if there are unanswered questions. And maybe digging into these questions will lead us to treasure. I think one of the strangest passages in the Bible is Genesis 6, 1 through 4, the Nephilim. I hope the Bema podcast would address it, but it did not. I would like to know how Marty and the rabbis explain it. Who are the sons of God? And are they marrying humans? Oh no, Brent, I'm realizing that you've moved questions that I was hoping I would have dealt with before I got to the rapid fire response section. Okay, so Melinda, first of all, when you say, I hope the Bema podcast would address it, but it did not, have you listened, Melinda, to the whole Bema podcast? Or just the Genesis portion? Because in season 6, we circled back around in an episode titled "The Pesky Nephilim" and something, something, something. So Brent will put that episode in the comments. It's still not going to dive in very deep and satisfy you. So, as a consolation prize, I will invite you to read "The Unseen Realm" by Dr. Michael Heiser. And it's a huge conversation. The reason we don't dive into it is you're asking a question about one of the deepest, widest sections of Jewish midrashic lore. Like the stuff underneath the Nephilim goes deep and wide and in a million different directions for a million different reasons. And it's just for what we're trying to do with the Bema podcast, it's a distraction. And so we don't dive deep into that because it would be beside the point. So anyway, but I recommend The Unseen Realm by Dr. Heiser. People seem to like that. I just think people do too much with it. They get a little wacky when they read it. So just don't get wacky. Okay, Melinda. All right. Gage says this. I wanted to say how grateful I am for the message you're spreading. My heart truly feels full. I started this journey when I started reading Asking Better Questions of the Bible. I've heard that's a great book, Gage. Brent will put a link to that book if anybody wants to get my first book, Asking Better Questions of the Bible. That's where his journey began. He was encouraged by his friend to share with me a remez and a potential drosh I discovered while reading Luke 24:36. Jesus uses the phrase "peace to you" when addressing his disciples after the resurrection. They do not recognize him as being truly there in the flesh. I notice that this is the same phrase used in the story of Joseph when his brothers arrive at his house, and he thinks there's a remez there. And Gage, I'm just going to say yes. There is so much conversation about a Joseph thread in the Gospels when it comes to Jesus' resurrection. In more than one gospel, there seems to be very intentional tiebacks between the gospel narrative and the Joseph narrative. I'm not even sure what to do. You nailed it, and I love it. I love what's going on. So good job, Gage. Allison said this. Hello, Baymaw family. I've been going through Matthew 9, listen to podcast 103, Healing as His Wings. I've been thinking a lot about the verse that says the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. I was wondering if you have found any more references or biblical connections to this verse about there being so much abundance and not walking out the blessing of the harvest. I think we talked some more about this, Allison, maybe in the John series in season 6. I want to say we dove a little deeper into that, but your main remez there is Ruth. I can't remember what I said in Matthew 9, but I think I might have referenced Ruth. Ruth is the remez that I go to. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. That's Ruth language. So I think the remez there is a remez to outsiders, foreigners. That's what I think is going on there, but I'll let you wrestle with that. Kelsey says this. Tammy and I were wondering if you've ever covered the parable of the weeds. Our Gentile 21st century Western way of thinking is not computing the even deeper context of what Jesus was saying. And we figured we'd ask you, please send your thoughts or your episode if you covered it. We miss you here in Moscow. Kelsey and Tammy, thank you for saying that. I miss all y'all in Moscow as well. Here's what Brent's going to throw in the comments. My favorite YouTube video that I think I've ever recorded, that does not mean it's the best one. It just means it was one of my favorites. When I got done, I was like, yeah. Was a video in my Kingdom series which was titled No Weeding Allowed. And I cover this parable. So Brent's going to throw that in there. That's one of my favorite teachings about this parable that I've been enjoy. Rapid fire responses. Brent, cue the music.
Rapid fire responses.
Sorry, I didn't realize the rapid fire questions had dependencies.
Oh,
Prereqs.
me either. Me either. I didn't either. All right, Brent, you need to give me a break while I go grab something to drink. So you do the station identification. Let's do this thing.
All right. Well, yeah, we are a part of a campus ministry called Impact Campus Ministries. We started as Marty came to Moscow about a year before I did to work with college students and started developing this BEMA material as a class for college students on a 2-year cycle. I got in on the second round of that. And then some things changed. Long story short, we didn't have time for all that, but we started the podcast in 2016. I started doing this full time in 2020 due to the support of people like you who listen and who want to wrestle with us. Like looking at the comments that we've had come in, like we have people from Seattle and Florida and Phoenix and Australia. Kylie wants to know if we're going to come to Australia, and I cannot tell you how much I want to come to Australia. So she wasn't even asking if I'm coming, but I want to. And I want to bring Marty with me.
I'm going to use Kylie's comment. I'm going to stockpile these so I can just blitz our executive team who would have to say it's okay for me to go to Australia for work. So I don't know. Someday. Maybe someday.
But we have people all over the world who are from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of different faith traditions, coming to the podcast at different points in their faith. But all of us are here because we have a love for the text and we want to wrestle with God's word and we want to be in community together. We want to figure out what it means to make disciples. We have a lot of questions, which is why we're here tonight. And it's just a beautiful community, a beautiful tapestry of God's people working together to understand more about who he is. And we're all here because you guys support us, and we're blessed to do this work.
Yep, I'll just ditto that. I'll say ditto to that. I'm right now I'm in the throes of a lot of major gift fundraising. We're out trying to get really large gifts to keep what we're doing going and make some changes we need to make and do some things well. And in the meantime, the one thing you're always worried about is as you're doing that, it's the small monthly gifts. It's those folks that are giving $10, $20 a month that keep the thing, like that's the center, like that's the engine, that's the motor that keeps everything going. And so our prayer is always that while we're out chasing this other stuff to help us accomplish some goals, that the other thing keeps going and you guys keep supporting what we do. And it's important that those gifts come in and you guys bless us in incredible ways. And so if you give, hear us, please say thank you. And if you've been listening for a while and you've never even thought about giving, this is the first time you've ever really heard us ask. Just know that even the small gifts, $10 a month, there are enough people that give $10 a month that makes a big difference. That pays for a person or two to be on staff with us and to help us out. And some people give a lot more than that. Some people are giving $100, $150, $300 a month. And all of those gifts are the thing that makes this possible. It allows Brent to be on the other side of the screen, allows Brian to send all the email responses when we're all done. It allows Amber and Shakoa to post all the social media pics of the Wild Wild West graphic, which everybody loves so much. I mean, that support has to turn into something, right?
It is.
Wild Wild West graphic.
You know, I would say that is encouraging the hearts and souls of everyone who sees it.
All right. Well, if I'm going to get through anything, I better dive back in here, Brent. What do you think?
I have one question to throw in. Sean wants to know what mic I'm using. It is a Heil PR40 microphone. and every word you have ever heard me say on the podcast has been through this microphone. Various other pieces of equipment in the chain on the back end, but that's the one. So back to the real questions.
Me too. Brent got me one of those as well. Still using it. It's a great mic. I mean, we've had that since we began, and it's a great microphone.
Yeah, we didn't have very much money to start the podcast because we didn't know it would become what it is, but we put all the money we had into the microphones.
Yep, we did good. You did good. Good job, Brent. All right, here we go. I'm jumping back in. John says this: I'm curious why we talk about Sarai giving Hagar to Abram, as Abram and Sarai not trusting God. Reviewing Genesis, God tells Avram that his offspring will be like the dust of the earth or like the stars, but he never specifies it will be with Sarai, at least not before Avram sleeps with Hagar. Complicating this more, Jacob does the same thing with Rachel, gives him Bilhah, and then again when Leah gives him Zilpah. Yet this is never discussed as something Jacob should not have done like it is with Avram. I've heard so many discussions and sermons about how Avram wasn't trusting God and took matters into his own hands, but never any discussion of Jacob. Why is this different? Well, gosh, John, I've never had anybody accuse me of being too kind to Jacob. That's a first. If you've listened to the Bema podcast, I get endless emails about how hard I am on Jacob and Joseph and how wrong I am about that. I agree with you. Jacob is not some shining star of a moral compass at all. And I think that's, like if we didn't talk about it in the podcast, it's because Jacob's so slimy and his family's so dysfunctional, I'm almost assuming it. And I did try, I don't know what I did with the reboot. John, I'm not sure what I said with the reboot, but I remember in the original episodes, I kept trying to intentionally come back to, I don't want to throw Abraham under the bus because Abraham is just like you and me. Abraham's doing his best with the information he has. So do you and I. But here's the thing. Our best with the information that we have is littered with insecurity, fear, trust, mistrust, screwing it up. And it's not about a scorecard. It's not about the amount of times where Abraham got it right and got an A or got it wrong and got an F. It's that Abraham models for us what a life of faith and faithfulness looks like. I can't tell you, looking back on my life, how many times I look and I say, well, golly, did I screw that up? That was a move that lacked trust in God, but I was doing the best I could. It's not an issue of judgment. It's not self-judgment. It's not us judging Abraham or throwing Sarai under the bus. It's us going, this is what it's like. This is what we do. This is what we do with our best efforts. We get it right, we screw it up. And that's part of why this story is told, I think. But I agree with you. I wouldn't lift up Jacob as Avram's the father of faith. Jacob's kind of a broken mess that God ends up working through to get the story done. And by the time the story is over, it's pretty beautiful, but it's a mess on the way to the end. I'll put it that way. Good question, though, John. I agree with you. Charles says this: I remember listening to your podcast, and it reshaped my understanding of eternal life in heaven. I began to see that eternal life isn't just a future destination, but something we live out of in the present, rather than more traditional Western Christian view of one day when we get to heaven. Lately, I've been following the Bible Project's new series on Exodus and how this story, even more than the creation story, is a recurring theme throughout the Bible, including the New Testament. If Exodus is a central pattern, I see it as a journey, leaving sin, slavery, captivity, moving into the wilderness and towards the promised land. This raises a question for me. If we already have eternal life in the present, yet we are still in the wilderness awaiting the promised land, which seems to parallel heaven, how do these ideas reconcile? Have I misunderstood? I've only listened to the first episode of this Bible Project series, so perhaps this will be explored further, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. First of all, Charles, you're in good hands listening to the Bible Project series. Good work there. They do some fantastic stuff. So good work there. I will say this. I'm not sure the promised land is supposed to parallel heaven. It's supposed to, heaven in the way that you're wanting to talk about it, yes, but not heaven in the way that we often think about it. The promised land is supposed to mimic the mission. Heaven in terms of mission, heaven in terms of partnership with God. The promised land wasn't the goal. The promised land is where the challenge lied. If you remember, God's trying to put his people at the crossroads of the earth, because he's trying to bless all nations. The promised land wasn't, they didn't walk into the promised land and go, oh, good, now we're here. I guess we'll kick up our feet. And the promised land is where everything got real. The promised land was actually harder than the wilderness. There was more failure in the promised land than there was in the wilderness. So the promised land is heaven in a missional sense. I'll give you another Bible Project conversation that might help. One of the first videos that Bible Project became famous for was the video where it showed heaven and earth overlapping. It was talking about eternal life, the same concept you're talking about. And there was a heaven circle and there's an earth circle, and how the concepts are supposed to be. There's this overlap of heaven and earth. And the restoration of all things is essentially where these two things perfectly overlap and get put back together again. Think about that description. Think of that video from the Bible Project. I don't know if Brent will find it. He may even throw a link in the comments. Who knows? But if you think about that video of heaven and earth in relationship to your question about the promised land, the promised land is supposed to be this place where these two worlds bump up against each other. But that also is true in the wilderness. It's also true in Egypt. Like when you're stuck in your slavery, when you're stuck in your oppression, when you're stuck in that too is a place where heaven keeps trying to break into our own personal hells. So that's true there even as well. Brent says he added one to the comments. He doesn't know if it's the right one. Good luck finding it. There you go. Justin says this: I have two questions for you, Marty. Before I ask, I wanted to say how much I've enjoyed your podcast. Thanks, Justin. I appreciate that. My first question is this: can you recommend another podcast? The way I read that was funny. Oh, Justin, that's fantastic. I love your podcast. Can you recommend another one? Yes, I can. Your first question is easy. I'll recommend two podcasts. We just talked about one of them, the Bible Project. Whether it's their videos, anything on their platform, they have a podcast, they have classrooms you can sign up for, they have paid content. Anything Bible Project's going to be fantastic investment. People find it useful all the time. The other one I'm going to say is this: Walking the Text with Brad Gray. Now, let me just tell everybody that just heard me say that. When you go look up Brad Gray's stuff, this is the joke I always say. It was nice knowing you, because his stuff is about 10 times better than mine. And you're gonna go to Walking the Text and be like, why did I ever listen to Bama? This stuff is great. So there you go. Brad Gray has some incredible stuff, phenomenal content. And I don't mean this in a self-deprecating way. There's Marty, but then there's Brad. Like, Brad is an actual scholar. He's not playing scholar like me. He's an actual scholar. And his stuff, his production is fantastic. The quality of his content's great. But he, as a scholar and as a teaching voice, is phenomenal. So there you go. Walking the Text, and Bible Project. Those are my two recommendations. All right. Brandon says this live. Oh, wait, there was a second question. Sorry, Justin, there's a second question. On a specific podcast, episode 96, you spoke about an eye for an eye and 3 examples of turning the other cheek, giving your cloak, walking the extra mile. I've realized so many people misuse that scripture. I'm not sure how to help and could really use some guidance. How do we help our church? How do we help our churches not keep misusing this? A lot of that, Justin, depends on whether or not you have a role of influence. Like if they view you, if the seminary trained pastors and teachers view you as just a regular old parishioner, you can recommend teaching resources. You can recommend John Yoder's work. It's John Yoder that originally kind of did the staple work on that, I believe. You could recommend that. You could recommend they read these books or those resources. But now, if you're in a position like I've often been, where you're on staff with a church, or you're in the preaching team rooms where you're crafting sermons and planning a series together and studying together to prepare, well, then you can have a lot more influence by saying, I'm not sure if that's the right way to see that. Let's look over here and let's study this. It all just depends on who you are, where you're at, and what you're able to do with your voice. And sometimes we can't do what we'd love to do with our voice, for better or for worse. And that's okay. That's okay. We steward the voice that we have in the places that we have it, and we let God do something with it. And then we let go and we trust. So there you go. Good question, though, Justin. Brandon has this live question. Are you familiar with Dr. Richard Booker's work on the biblical feasts? Any thoughts on his theory that Jesus died on Wednesday at twilight? Oh, I think Brett put this question in here because he knows how I feel about this theory. I'm not familiar with Dr. Richard Booker's work. I, if I can just be honest, I hate this theory. I hate it. I hate it with everything in me. I'm sure that's why Brent put it in here, probably smiling. Maybe Brent doesn't even know. I just hate this. I just hate this theory. Um, it's usually driven by. I don't know about Dr. Richard Booker. I don't know why he's coming at it from where his reference point is. Um, it sounds like maybe it's connected to feasts and all that different stuff. Usually, people are cranking this theory up because they need 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and 3 nights, 3 days and 3 nights. And it's an overextension of only two references that I'm going to claim aren't directly referencing the resurrection. They're referencing the prophets of Hosea and Isaiah. And there are prophetic references to 3 days and 3 nights. Or they're talking about the sign of Jonah, which has to do with the Gentiles, but we make it about the resurrection. But 3 days in the Jewish mind is any part of a day. So 1 hour on Friday, all of Saturday, and 1 hour on Sunday would be 3 Jewish days. So 26 hours is all that's required. I should say 26 and a half hours is all that's required for it to be 3 Jewish days. So in the record, and people don't understand what John is doing when he talks about preparation day, there's all these misunderstandings of what they're reading in the Gospels when they try to harmonize it. When you harmonize it in Jewish context, what's happening is Jesus is having the Passover Seder on a Thursday night because the actual Passover falls on a Sabbath night, which means that Jesus has the Passover Seder meal, but is crucified while the Paschal sacrifice is being crucified, which is important, and what the text says is happening. He sits in the tomb all day on Saturday, Sabbath, and then is resurrected. Now, that does connect to the feasts, Brandon, because, and I'm unprepared for this question, so you kind of caught me. Live questions will get you. I don't mean to be mean when I say I hate this theory. It just bugs the daylights out of me because it's one of these things that everybody brings up. When you have Passover, the first Sunday after Passover is always first fruits. I don't need it to happen on Wednesday in order to make that work. It's the same. It's the same festival blueprint, no matter when it happens. So Jesus is crucified on a Friday with a Paschal sacrifice. That following Sunday is first fruits. It's where they start counting they don't start counting the Omer, but that's where the 7 weeks starts that leads to Pentecost. So everything fits festival-wise, calendar-wise. That's my own theory. So, who knows? I could be wrong about stuff, but generally speaking, I've always hated the reasoning that lies behind that theory. But I'm not familiar with Dr. Richard Booker. He may have a different take on it that's totally different than what I'm familiar with. There you go. Okay. Susan, I'm new to Slack, a beginner discussion, a group facilitator. I'm not sure where to start these questions. My daughter and I were discussing the laws regarding sacrifices in the Old Testament. 2 questions. How are the priests supposed to manage so many sacrifices every day? Each time somebody sinned, over 1 million people in the desert, a sacrifice was made. We couldn't imagine the amount of animals being processed in a timely manner. Where did the sacrifices offerings come from? This is the second question. They left Egypt with copious amounts of things the Egyptians gave them, plus their own stocks. But after a couple of years with no farmland or time to plant, sow, crop, surely their supplies would dwindle. Thank you for your help. So many things. Let's go back to your first question, Susan. If we have millions of people in the desert, I mean, I'm not trying to. The word alephim usually means thousands in the Hebrew. But the word has also been used to speak of clans. Is the term 400 alephim, 400,000 fighting men? Or is it 400 clans of fighting men? If it's millions, and there's reasons why the authors would choose this word to make it sound like millions when it really wasn't millions. Millions isn't historically plausible. It's not even materially possible. I'm not trying to freak people out or take away from you. We should probably be hearing 400 clans. It's probably more like 70,000 to 180,000 people. It's not 4.5 million people wandering through the desert. If you have 4.5 million people, 20 people wide, the people on the back of the line are still standing in Egypt when the front of the line gets to the bottom of Sinai. So, A, let's adjust the amount of people we see, right? Okay, let's do that. I probably shouldn't have said all that in a live stream because it's going to freak people out. But it's a great question you're asking, Susan. But second of all, most Christians have a misunderstanding of how the sacrificial system works. You are not offering an animal every single time you sin. There is a sin offering offered once in the morning and once in the afternoon, 9 a.m. in the morning, 3 p.m. in the afternoon. One goat twice a day. Listen to me. One goat twice a day for the whole nation. Christians have given people the idea that every time you sin, you had to bring a goat. Every time you screwed up, you brought a goat. No. There's a sin offering twice a day for the whole nation. Now, there are special offerings when I cause a break in relationship or fellowship with my fellow brother or sister. When I discover I've done something that I need to make amends for. Not just general. Like there are special offerings that you are given as a gift from God. Like this is how you can navigate this atonement when you need it. But you don't need that. That's not happening thousands of times every day. It's not. There's not a line of people, 10,000 people long, every morning at the tabernacle. So that hopefully is helpful. That's what most people imagine. You're not silly, Susan, for thinking that. I bet 80% of Christians have that same, probably more than that, to be honest, have that same image of how it functioned at the tabernacle. But that's not how sin and guilt offerings worked in the Levitical system. So hopefully that helps, right? And then, yeah, when I adjust the numbers and all that kind of stuff, now the supplies, they did come out of Egypt with flocks and herds, as the story tells it. Those flocks and herds reproduce. Every 10th animal is being given to the Levitical. You don't have to bring, I mean, you do if it's a special sacrifice, but the sacrifice that's being offered twice a day, you're having to give because every 10th animal you're having to give to the Levites. Every firstborn animal you're having to give to the Levites. Every voluntary offering that you pay with money, you give to the Levites, and they can buy everything they need for the temple. So that's how they're acquiring those things, right? And there's a difference between the tabernacle and the temple, and that's a part of what your question is, but that's how that operated. It's a lot more feasible than we often picture in our minds when we maybe have some misunderstandings of the Levitical system and how it functions. So hopefully that's helpful, Susan. It's a good question, and one that a lot of people have. Andrea says, a friend recently recommended Bema to me as I was looking for a deeper way to engage with Scripture. I've really enjoyed it. I have a question about Lent. Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of the Lenten season, which is traditionally said to last 40 days, reflecting Jesus' time in the wilderness. However, when I count from Ash Wednesday to the Thursday before Good Friday, it actually totals 46 days if Sundays are included. I know the number 40 is significant in the Old Testament, but I'm curious why the discrepancies. Are Sundays traditionally not counted? The answer to that is yes. You don't count Sundays during Lent. So Sundays are not counted, right? So you don't count the Sundays, you end up with 40 days. That's why when you're doing a Lenten fast, you fast for every day except Sunday. You get a break. So if you follow a true traditional Catholic Lenten fast, you're fasting every day except Sunday. And then on Sunday, you get to celebrate by breaking your fast. And then you fast Monday through Saturday, and then you break your fast. So the 40 days is the total of the Lenten season minus the Sundays. So that's the quick answer to your question. Jason says, in Genesis 1, we're taught that the text is translated, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Who is the us? I know as a Christian we believe it's the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But how does a Jew believe the other us is? So that us, Jason, I don't know if your guys' video is freaking out, but mine is. My internet here at the hotel might not be awesome, but I'm sure Brent will tell me if I'm breaking up. This is that same recommendation, Jason, where I'm going to recommend Dr. Michael Heiser and the Unseen Realm. The Bible Project has also talked about it on their podcast. The idea you're looking for is the idea of the divine council. The divine council. So the original audience of Genesis, the ancient Jewish conversation, the sages, the rabbis, they understood us to be the divine council of gods, the angels, the unseen realm. There's a divine council. God is speaking to all y'all, and He is God Almighty, right? So there's that concept of Ha Elohim, which is Elohim is just God, but Ha Elohim would be more appropriately translated the gods, which the Jews interpreted as, oh, there is the divine council of heavenly beings that's being referenced in some of these passages. So that's how they understood it. Doesn't mean they're right, but that's how they understood it. That's the answer to your question. I recommend Dr. Heiser's stuff for that. Oh, let's see here. Tyler has a long question. Let's see if I can summarize this. Tyler is a youth pastor, and he's really appreciated the podcast. He's dove into some of the references that we've had. His youth group was working their way through the Gospel of John, and they got to the story of the adulterous woman, the woman caught in adultery, and in doing so, he noticed something. Taking into account the context of the passage that immediately follows, the religious leaders are pressing Jesus on who is your father? Like, who's your father? And seemingly insulting Jesus by claiming they are not illegitimate children. Is it possible that the preceding story of the woman was meant to highlight the religious leaders confronting Jesus with a woman that bore a striking resemblance to his own mother's story? Ooh. A woman possibly pregnant, thus caught in adultery, with a notable, by the law of Moses, lack of accused male, as though they were insinuating that Jesus' mother should have been stoned, and no respectable rabbi, let alone Messiah, could possibly have come from such a sinful and shameful past. It struck me that this would definitely fit in with the idea of Jesus as a mamzer, and would generally be in keeping with, and even setting the stage for the following debate with the religious leaders. Tyler, I've never, when you sent this question, I've never even thought about it. It's such an interesting possibility. It may even be a plausibility. You just be careful before you pull the trigger on, like, I think this is what's going on. Like, I love coming up with these ideas. It would shine so much light under the context. But to say I think that's what's happening is a step that, for me as a Bible teacher, I'm gonna always present as a what if, exactly how you presented it here. Is it possible? I wonder if, could it be, because to start saying, I think this is what's going on, really shifts the weight of that conversation, right? In a place that, if I were in your shoes, I would be uncomfortable with. Having said all of that, Tyler, I think it's a fascinating question to toy with. I really think it's very interesting. Could it be that this woman, the reason that there's not a man brought forward is she's pregnant, and they're like like they're going after him and his mom and his own story. It fits with the larger, it's just such an interesting, intriguing idea. I'm going to ask other people that I know. And maybe if you spend more time with it, maybe you actually, it's not just a random abstract idea. Maybe there are things that can cinch that up some. It's a fascinating idea. Fascinating, Tyler. Good question. Ben says, in the Old Testament, why did something have to die in order to atone for sin? I'm a PhD level seminary graduate, but I've never come across an answer to that question that didn't take me directly into penal substitutionary atonement, which he's become less convinced of. And I've heard a podcast episode where Marty mentioned something about it as a passing comment. Could you point me to a more comprehensive discourse on this question? I would say this. I don't know if I don't know if I can toss you to a resource that actually deals with that directly, Ben. I'm trying to think. We had an episode in session 6 where we talked about the Jewish roots of Christianity, and one of them was on the atonement in Hebrews. It was one of Brent's favorite discussions in that series. I'm sure he can find that. Atonement in Hebrews, Levitical system, the Levitical sacrifice in Hebrews. You can put that in the comments. But here's the quick answer from where I stand. Um, to say that something has to die is the basis for penal substitutionary atonement. Has to is a legal statement. If you're saying that something has to die, you're referring to like a legal code, like some abstract law of the cosmos or law of something that's penal language, right? To say that something has to die. So let's put that aside because you're already facing penal substitutionary atonement simply by asking the question that way. Not you, but the people that say that, right? So let's turn a little bit and realize that no Jewish understanding of the atonement system believed that. They did not believe the goat had to die for your freedom. That's not how they didn't have a substitutionary understanding of sacrifice. The sacrifice facilitated your ability to worship God. The sacrifice facilitated your ability to approach God. I have a friend, an Orthodox Jewish friend in Old City, Jerusalem, not a believer in Jesus, who will always say, no Jew believed that something had to die in order for you to find atonement. Atonement was facilitating your ability to cleave to God. A sacrifice was God's gift to you so that you knew how to approach him in a way that your conscience could be cleansed. You know how to approach God. You don't have to be scared. You don't have to crack the door open to see if it's okay to approach God, because God's already told you, if you do this, this, and this, you can approach me. The sacrifice was a gift. It was not a substitute. The sacrifice was not something that had to die so that you don't have to. The sacrifice was something that God gave you. This is what Hebrews is doing. The book of Hebrews says, now that Jesus has made one sacrifice for all time, let us boldly approach the throne of grace. That's the conversation in Hebrews. It's a conversation about this idea of Jewish sacrifice. And that doesn't mean that substitution or that substitutionary atonement or that even penal substitutionary atonement doesn't have its place. Please hear me, doesn't mean that Ben agrees, but please hear me say, I think it still has its place. The problem is, in modern Christian evangelical thought, it's become the only way we understand atonement. Well, it's one of a lot of ways to understand atonement, and it has its place at times, and it even has ways in which it can relate to the Levitical system of sacrifice. But it is not the primary way that the people who wrote the New Testament or the people that heard the New Testament would have understood atonement and the sacrificial system. So it's a really good question, Ben. I hope that that's helpful. I don't think the question is something we can't assume. I think there are ways to talk about it that you could do it well, but I don't think something had to die in order to atone for sin. I think maybe I would be, now I'm questioning myself. Something has to die in order for us to know that we can approach God. If that's what we're talking about with atonement, then I'm okay with that question. But if we're assuming substitution, that's where I have questions, theological questions. Again, I'm not rejecting it. I just think the conversation is bigger than that. 7:48 p.m. Mountain Time. Okay, Brianna, greetings to the Baymont team. This is a very random question, but I'd love to get Marty's insight. I love the Baymont podcast. It's given me a ton of insight and been a catalyst for my flourishing relationship with God. So thank you for your diligence and obedience. You're welcome, Brianna. Thank you for your kind words. Independent fashion designer in Philadelphia, working on developing a clothing brand that she wants to call Ruach, referring to the Spirit of God, the breath of God, the Ruach of God. She wants to call it Ruach Apparel. So my question is, would it be disrespectful or sacrilegious in any way to name the brand Ruach? I'm not Jewish, although I love the Eastern worldview. I just want to be respectful of the culture and God's holiness, so I'm seeking advice and confirmation. Brianna, first of all, I just love the spirit behind your question. I love that you would be aware enough to ask it and then be selfless enough to care. It's beautiful. Let me work backwards from a more extreme example and then get back to what you're talking about. I start to get nervous personally when people start tattooing the holy name of God in Hebrew on their bodies. I know there's going to be people listening to me right now that have it. I don't think you're going to hell. It's okay. All I said was I start to get nervous. The Jewish people won't even say the name. Jewish observers, Torah observant Jews, won't even write. Do you hear me? They won't even write the name. They won't even write God. They'll put G-D. They are that committed to the holiness of the name of God, right? So I always get nervous when Christians are like, oh yeah, I totally got Adonai, but they're like talking about the Yod He Vav He like tattooed on their bicep. Like I'm like, ooh. First of all, Torah says not to tattoo, not you. If you're a Gentile, that's fine. But for a Jew, you're like doing something that for them they can't like a Torah observant Jew is not going to need a tattoo, period. And then you're taking the name of it. So that's like an extreme example of where I'm like, I get nervous when we're doing that, right? Doesn't mean you're wrong. Doesn't mean you're bad. Doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. Please don't get your tattoo removed. It's fine. But that's my example of like, okay, now let me start walking back. If I'm not using the name of God, if I'm not taking something that's, you're just talking about a word, a Hebrew word. This is not, I would not call this a problem. The only thing that I would be aware of if I were in your shoes is how I hold it. When Christians start taking this and acting like it's there, oh, this is my language. This is my, I'm not Jewish, I don't speak Hebrew, but this is my word now, and I'm going to kind of use it however. And they stop relating to it as like, this is a part of that story. This is a part of their faith. This is a part of their language. If I'm not appropriating it, and I don't hear you appropriating it at all, Brianna, I think you're fine. My short answer is I think you're fine. I would name my clothing company Ruach. I named our podcast Bema. And you could say I'm Jewish, and that's fine. I get that. But I named my church before I was hired by Impact. I pastored a church in Boise I called Shekinah. Um, and I think it's okay to use Hebrew words to name things respectfully and to hold it in a way that's not appropriation. So I think you're fine. I think you're in a good spot. And the fact that you're aware enough to even ask, I think is beautiful. And for all of you that have tattooed the name of God on your back, it's okay, right? It's going to be okay. We all make decisions in life. Some of them are permanent. All right? It's all right. It's okay. Becca says, my husband and I are on episode 6. We're soaking this stuff up like a sponge. And then she goes on to say, I'm going to try to like summarize these questions for the sake of time. She says that her husband and her are starting to feel really resentful towards Western church, and they're now waking up to this. I totally get it, Becca. And so she asked at one point, she says, are we alone? Is this normal? Is this a regular question you guys get? Yes. The answer to that, Becca, is absolutely. We get this impulse, this question, this inquiry all the time. And this is a natural course of the journey, right? You have like pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional wisdom. You lived in like a pre-conventional wisdom, like an ignorant place, right? And then you wake up to a more conventional, a more informed worldview. And now you really struggle with that old, immature, ignorant worldview you had. My encouragement is to keep going. Don't stop there, because there's a post-conventional understanding. Here's a little bit of what I mean. In the pre-conventional world, my church was all tied up. My faith expression, my theology systems, they were synonymous with my faith, with my salvation, with my worship, with my identity. And then I moved from pre-conventional to conventional, and I realized like, oh gosh, some of that stuff that was my identity, some of that stuff that was my faith, some of that stuff that was these systems was wrong. And so then I like learn and I grow. but then keep moving because now I can appreciate my church, my theology, my faith expressions, my traditions, my liturgy. Now they can take up a new residence. So there's the deconstruction, but keep going into the reconstruction. And it doesn't mean that you will have to go back into the same faith space. You might need to find a new tradition, a new faith space. But find some kind of tradition. Find some, because you're as happy as you are about Eastern worldview, you're still Western. You still live in a Western world. So you will need to find some form of Western expression and some way to take up space in a Western world so that you can, does that make sense? Like, find a new way to appreciate those old wineskins, right? It doesn't work to take the new wine and put it in the old wineskins, but eventually you will be able to go, okay, but that old wine is still pretty good if I use it in the right way. So I can't put new wine into old wineskins, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy the old wine in new ways. That's what faith has looked like for me. I love Christian tradition now. I'm going to graduate study in a Catholic institution. I love my Stone Campbell church that I'm a part of today. I was just, this last weekend, I was at home in my Reformed church. Like, that's like the opposite theological end of the spectrum. But I love being there too. Because faith isn't tied to, it's not all the same thing. My faith now comes underneath to support something bigger and better. But I don't have to get rid of the faith it's natural to go through a phase where you're a little angry because you did this and now you're realizing you can't anymore. So you're like, I'm so angry and frustrated that it used to be this. Okay, but then keep going and figure out how to do this, right? That's my 2 cents. It's my encouragement. Oh, lover of truth. No name, just lover of truth was their social media handle. Said, Marty, I watched a great season 3, episode 58 on abolish or fulfill and have this question. How did Jesus give real meaning to passages like Deuteronomy 25, 11 through 12? Oh, I was going to look up what that meant. Brent, grab that verse for me. I'll go on to the next question. You grab that verse and copy paste it in the document for me. I looked it up and I just can't remember which verse it is. Kendall says this, I'm in season 3, Galatians. There's a big circumcision debate. I've wondered this all my life. Why circumcision? Why did God pick that as a thing? Why not a tattoo or a special number or a piercing or a lightning-shaped scar on the why circumcision is Kendall's question, right? And there's a lot of ways we could talk about it, Kendall. There really is a lot of ways. A historical way that I might talk about it, Kendall, would be this. The world that they're coming out of, Abraham's just gone down to Egypt. Egypt would be the world and the culture they're probably most familiar with. It's either going to be Babylon or Egypt. That's going to be the worlds that they're connected to. In Egypt, we don't know of circumcision practice in Babylon that is of any relevance. However, in Egypt, the priestly class is circumcised, right? The priestly class is circumcised. So why would God choose circumcision? Because he might be making a statement to Abraham that all of his descendants are priests. All of his descendants are priests. There's a connection to circumcision and priesthood in their mind, and that could be it. Brent, are you out there? Can you see me? Deuteronomy 25, 11 through 12. Can you find that passage for me and put it in the document for me? I'm not seeing Brent's cursor. It's making me nervous. Help me, Brent. You're my only hope. I'm moving on to the next question while I wait for...
It's in there. But I don't know why you're not seeing it. Do you want me to just read it?
Why is my Google Doc not updating? Have you been trying to communicate with me about anything else?
Nope. Well, actually, I did put a comment in there blaming your hotel Wi-Fi earlier, and you didn't read that. So I'm back
I
to
don't think
blaming the
I've
hotel
gotten.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, go ahead and read it.
If two men are fighting and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her
Oh,
husband
yeah.
from his
Oh, yeah.
assailant and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, you shall cut off her hand. Show her no pity.
All right. All right, lover of truth. I'm sure that there's a part of this question where you might be trying to be just a tad bit cheeky by choosing the verse about testicle grabbing. But let's focus on, say, the capital punishment nature. You're going to cut off her hand. Feels a little drastic. I'm sure that's a part of your question. Not just the cheeky part of it, but I'm sure you're actually saying, like, we're just going to chop off people's hands. Like, how does Jesus have something to say about this? When you look at things in Torah that are dealing with, say, capital punishment, we don't have much evidence that anybody ever suffered capital punishment at the hands of Torah because the people of Torah almost never interpreted Torah to the extent of capital punishment. I mean, you have tales of the Gospels where people are stoning Stephen, they're stoning Jesus, they're wanting to stone others. I'm sure that I'm not saying it never happened. I'm saying the typical dominant interpretation, the way that most folks who engaged with Torah interpreted Torah, even though Torah said to uphold capital punishment, they didn't. And how could they not? Torah's telling them what to do. Well, they said, Torah's not telling us what to think. Torah's teaching us how to think. So we prefer not to kill people. We prefer not to chop off hands. Torah's teaching us how to think. Torah's teaching us that we should take this very seriously. Torah's teaching us something about how to administer justice. But we don't have to chop off hands. We don't actually have to stone our rebellious sons. And I think a lot of people that grew up in fundamentalist Christianity like me would go, well, they're wrong. And I would argue that the question to lover of truth's question, is actually it would show us that actually they were right. Because Jesus did the exact same thing. We just talked about the story of the woman caught in adultery earlier. Torah is very clear about what to do. And Jesus doesn't do that. What am I supposed to do with this crazy law about people? Well, it's teaching me how to think. It's teaching me how to relate one to another. It's teaching me how I would treat my neighbor. It's teaching me about some level of social order. It's teaching me that there's some level of importance about that. But when it comes down to whether or not we're chopping off hands and stoning rebellious sons, I'm going to follow Jesus because Jesus is the fulfillment of that law. And Jesus seems to show mercy over and over, time and time again. And that doesn't undo the law of Deuteronomy. It doesn't undo the fact that Deuteronomy is still teaching me how to think and that there's still all the things that I just listed a moment ago. But Jesus is also saying, always interpret my law through the lens of love and mercy. So the law is teaching me how to think, but you don't have to hold it with heavy, heavy hands. No pun intended. Okay. How much more time? I'm past the hour. What do I got here? How many more questions? Oh my gosh. Becca says, nope, I already did that one. Lover of Truth. Kendall, we already did that one. Sean says, I've been finding an answer. I tried to find an answer to my question, but he wanted to know, like, he can't find any answer to why Jesus would heal the man twice. Remember the man that has blindness in Bethsaida, and he gets healed, but can see people like trees moving around, and so he gets healed a second time, and he wanted an explanation. And he was looking all around the internet. Sean, don't look around the internet. Just look in the Bema podcast. We talked about that in episode 118, Eyes That Cannot See. We talked about that passage in Mark, just to deal with that. So go listen to that episode. That's my quick answer. Jonah says this, my question is regarding this. The Jews did not kill Jesus. This has been one of the most destructive misinterpretations of history that the world has ever seen. That's a quote from me. Jonah then says, why did the people choose Barabbas when they had the chance to choose, even though everything Jesus had done for them? It could not have been the chief priests and the elders making the pick as I read it. Thanks for the answer and keep up the good work. Jonah, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did to the earlier question about who killed Jesus and the chief priests. I do think this is a chief priest. I think this is a chief priest because the text tells us that it's a chief priest and the people that they have recruited, and we're told that they're controlling the mob. This isn't just a random group of Jews hanging out in the praetorium at Pilate's place. This is a group, a mob that the chief priests have brought in for this purpose. They're directing the traffic, and the Gospels tell us that much directly. The reason why they would let Barabbas go is a great question. And I think it shows you the extent to which I think Pilate offers Barabbas because he's trying to force their hand. Pilate's thinking exactly what you're thinking, Jonah. Pilate's thinking there's no way they're going to choose Barabbas. He's against everything they stand for. They want Barabbas dead. But at the end of the day, they want Jesus dead even more than Barabbas. And so Pilate offers Barabbas, and they end up choosing him because that. And notice the chief priests have to work up the crowd to ask for Barabbas. So I think your question is something that Pilate assumes, and he's banking on. And that's actually how badly they want Jesus crucified. So it's a great question and shows the depth to which they were. Tommy says, "Thank you for your work, my son. Link me to your podcast." Jesus says, let your light shine before men so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Tommy says, why do you think Jesus said your Father in heaven and not my Father in heaven? I think the short answer to this question, Tommy, is Jesus is identifying as, and particularly in that gospel. In John, Jesus is going to do a whole lot more my Father talk. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is very my Father-ish. But in the synoptics, Jesus is our Father or your Father because Jesus is identifying with them. So he's not saying your Father and not my Father. He's saying your Father in the sense of our Father, like the Lord's Prayer, right? So there's that. Darcy says, having been having a debate on what Jesus was clothed in when he washed the disciples' feet. Essentially, he takes off his outer garment and then girded his waist with a towel. What is he wearing? Darcy says. He's wearing two different garments. There's always an outer robe and an under robe, right? The outer robe is called a tallit. It's the robe you would have worn on the outside. So this would be my tallit layer. But then underneath this, I have an undershirt on, and that would be my haluk. It obviously looks different, but you have an outer layer, your tallit, and an undergarment layer, which is your haluk. Your tallit and your haluk. So Jesus takes off his tallit, basically gets down to his servant wear, his underwear, his undergarments, and serves. That's the layers that are going on there. The prayer shawl that people know about is called your tallit. I wear a tallit, which actually happens to be an undergarment today, but this is my tallit, right? It's got my tassels on it, right? That's my tallit. But underneath my tallit, I'm wearing haluk. There you go. Bill says, I'm on episode 31, wondering when we're going to address the problems. We're always talking about problems. And Bill says, sometimes you deal with the problems, but a lot of times you don't. There's all these other problems that are left hanging. And I'm going to deal with this real quickly, Bill, for the sake of time. Sometimes those questions are left hanging because there's always more to learn. And to answer every single question that we raise would be counterproductive to what we're trying. Like we're trying to keep a discussion streamlined. We're trying to push us towards a lesson. So sometimes there are answers to some of those questions, and we're just not dealing with that because we're not going to get caught on every single rabbit trail, every single distraction, because we're trying to do something as a teacher to teach you about the story of the scripture. Sometimes the questions have answers that I'm not even aware of. And sometimes there are unanswered questions that are simply unanswered questions because all the questions are designed to get us to think critically about the text, right? So sometimes there's answers that we just didn't deal with. Sometimes there's answers that I don't know about, and sometimes there's just not answers. And that's what we're trying to do when we engage the text. What are all the questions that we have when we come to this text? The goal isn't to answer all the questions. The goal is to ask so many questions that we uncover wisdom and meaning. And not just any old which way, but we're going to ask the questions and end up landing on the questions that drive tradition. Marty's not just spewing his own ideas about Genesis. Marty's trying to teach you what Jewish tradition says about Genesis. And even that's not singular. So that's why we use questions the way we use questions. So sorry for the uncomfortable nature of that, but that's what we want to get used to. We want to get used to questions, unanswered questions, unresolved questions. It's the nature of it. It's how good study happens. It's different than Western thinking. Western thinking tries to remove questions. Eastern thinking increases questions. Nico, huge fan of the podcast. Listen to it every morning. I just hit episode 40. The book's being rearranged. Do you have any recommendations in a chronological Tanakh, or that put things in a chronological order? I don't know if you're asking Nico, like Nico saying, I just learned that the books of your Christian Bible are in a different order from a Hebrew Bible. And then he asks about a chronological Bible. I don't know if those are the same thing, because the Hebrew Tanakh is not organized chronologically. So if you're asking about chronological order, there are lots of chronological Bibles, but none of them can be done personally, because there's all these moments where you have to figure out what you're going to do chronologically. Is it about when the book is writing about, or is it about when the book is written? Is it about... there's so many questions chronologically. So there's lots of different chronological Bibles. But if you're talking about Tanakh book order, if you just want a book order that's more appropriate to the Bible, that, like, as Jesus and the apostles would have understood, you can get any JPS. Just look for Jewish Study Bible, and it won't have the New Testament, but a Jewish Study Bible, usually published by Oxford, put out by the JPS, which is the Jewish Publication Society. That is, they put out a new version every, I don't know, every year, every other year, every two or 3 years. And it's your best version of a Jewish Bible that's out there. So you can get that. There's lots of different ones. Once you know, you can find something there. So there you go. Billy says, why is it in episode 9 y'all talk about the tradition to stay with the family as Avram did in Genesis 2? God says that man shall leave his father and mother. Wouldn't that have been passed on from generation to generation? It wasn't back then, though. That's the problem, Billy, is historically there wasn't a time when the male left to go live with the female. It was always the other way around. The female is leaving to go be a part of the patriarchal family until the Hellenistic period. So the question is that verse in Genesis, it feels parenthetical. You make a decision on that. To me, it feels like a parenthetical addition. Like this was not a part of the original. You're reading the story of Adam and Eve, and then all of a sudden some narrator comes in out of nowhere and goes, by the way, this is why a man leaves his father and mother. Was that added at a later date as the Bible's being redacted and pinned together? Is that being added during the Hellenistic period? Or is it going to be a more, if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's a prophetic reference to Jesus? You know what I'm saying? Jesus left his home to come live with his bride. At the end of the book of Revelation, Jesus comes to live with us here. There's a wedding feast, and we don't leave to go out of here. Jesus comes here to live with us. Could it be a prophetic wink, wink, nudge, nudge to Jesus? Maybe that makes you feel more comfortable. I don't know. There you go. Mary, I'm so close, guys. We're going to do this. We're so close. I'm doing a deep dive into Genesis 1 through 11. It's been so good. And here's the thing. For whatever reason, my Google Doc is not updating. So if Brent's trying to tell me to be quiet and stop, I can't see it. Mary says, I'm doing a deep dive, Genesis 1 through 11. Reading the account of Noah, it says in the 600th year, Noah and his wife, his 3 sons and their wives all entered the ark. Were there no offspring from any of the sons during that time? There would be no children that entered the ark. There's only those 8 people. Indeed, Mary, that's the short answer is yes. Jewish tradition says they did not have children. There's lots of actually Jewish traditions about this, and there's lots of ways to tell this story. Some Jewish tradition says the world was so evil that they weren't having children until the other side of the flood and the ark. Some tradition says they were newly married. In fact, one Jewish tradition says that the last son isn't even married yet, and the 8th passenger of the ark is actually Og, who rides the ark on the outside like a barnacle. And we actually do an episode that Brent can link in the comments where we talk about that in season 6. Garrett says, a big fan of the podcast and have been much more struck by the symbolic image of the numbers. Do I have a good source for Jewish numerology? And the quick answer to that is no, Garrett. The book that's on my bibliography is not a good book. I don't even know how to say the last name. Lubashanj. I don't know which. sounds Scandinavian to me. I don't know. But it's not a great resource. I am not going to recommend that as a book on numerology. It's hard to get anything online because numerology has changed over the course of 2,000 years, and there's Kabbalah, and there's medieval numerology, and there's Talmudic numerology, and there's Second Temple numerology, and it's very, very difficult to pin down. I'm sure there's a source out there. I just haven't found it yet, and I don't have a good recommendation for you. So that's my quick answer. Sorry about that. 2 questions left, everybody. When Alex says, when you went through John, you had a graphic of the seating for 13 people at Passover. 13? Yeah, 13. Jesus and the 12 disciples, right? Would they have had 14 chairs because of the seat for Elijah? The answer to that question is no, Alex. The Elijah seat would have come later after the destruction of the temple. So if you've ever heard my teaching on Elijah's cup, I think there's a YouTube video actually. 2 Passovers ago, I think my Festival Edition YouTube video, Brent might be able to find it by the time we're done. I talk about the 5th cup, Elijah's cup. That was the same energy that Elijah's seat ends up becoming later. But Elijah's seat is a later addition. In the Second Temple, when the temple was still standing, they had Elijah's cup. So Elijah's cup instead of Elijah's seat. So they wouldn't have had an extra seat. They had the cup. The seat comes centuries down the road. Not too long, but centuries down the road. Karen, last question. We were studying the information in episode 100, the episode about Lazarus having leprosy and his sister Martha and Mary. The discussion was about whether or not it was Lazarus that had leprosy, but a different Lazarus. Can you explain how you came up with the conclusion that it was Martha and Mary's brother and not a different Lazarus? That's a great question, Karen. And I'm making an assumption based on the way I want to put the historical details together. There's no, that's how I came to it. That's how I want to see it historically. There's no proof. Lots of people would disagree with that. I do it because that's the way that I see the historical details coming together the nicest. But I have no way of coming to that conclusion. In fact, there's a whole lot of textual scholarship right now looking at how John references Mary and Martha and Lazarus and all of that. So I think there's record of Mary and Martha, who are obviously sisters to Lazarus. I think historically it makes sense that Lazarus probably dealt with potentially leprosy, but you can't say that for sure. I'm making an assumption because they live in Bethany. I'm making an assumption that Bethany was a leper colony, and a lot of historians have said that's a big arbitrary leap. They're not wrong. I think it's the right leap, but it is a leap. And so lots of scholarship would say you should not be making that connection. We don't know that Lazarus was a leper. It just makes sense to me. I like how it flows with the story. Lazarus is a leper. He eventually dies from his leprosy. Then he's raised back to life again. We're not told that in the text. And you could easily say, man, if that were the case, I feel like somebody would put that detail in the text in here. It'd be good. Could be right. You could absolutely be right. So I just don't know. Karen, I made assumptions and spoke too quickly in the podcast. So there you go. Hey, everybody. We got to the end. Only 20 minutes late.
I'd say based on how the last part of that went, I got to do one thing, Marty.
What's that? Yeah! It was. That was a rapid fire response section if I ever heard one.
Oh, my goodness. Jessica wants to know, will you answer questions that were submitted and not gotten to? We have 12 live questions that are left on the cutting room floor. We are not saving those. We will not get to them. I'm sorry. Other questions that were submitted in other ways, generally through the contact form at BaymontDiscipleship.com. Those questions, we don't necessarily get to all those either. So just because you submit a question doesn't mean we're going to end up addressing it. We try to address a variety of things. I don't know, Marty, maybe you can talk about what the philosophy is there, but there's just so many questions. We'd be doing a live stream 3 times a week to
Yeah,
get to everything.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of filters. Just because you submit a question using the contact form doesn't mean that it makes it to what we call our parking lot. But if it does make it to the parking lot, I go through and I filter it yet again. I send some to Elle, I send some to Josh, I send some to Reed. So some of them sit there for 9 months before somebody deals with them. Some of the questions just get, I'm looking for questions that represent, I'm not telling you this that you know how to get through my filter. I'm trying to tell you how I filter some of these questions. I'm looking for questions that represent that common, practical, emotional, questions that are really submitted from a genuine sense of curiosity, that represent the spirit of our live stream Q&A. I push those into the document. And I have a hard time saying no to questions because I love questions. Like I love that you guys, it kills me right now to hear Brent say there are 12 questions on the cutting room floor. I'm just like, Brent, let's go 3 hours. Let's do the 12 questions that are on the cutting room. I don't want to but that's how we do that. Now, my goal is always to try to not do what we did tonight. We had so much in the parking lot that I probably should have filtered more because I like to be able to say yes. Listen to me. I like to say yes to the 12 questions that are on the cutting room floor right now because the live questions are so much more fun with a live audience. I like to do a mix of both. So that's just my bad. Last month was L, so we were backed up kind of like 2 months. We had 2 months of a backup. Next month's going to be Josh. So then in June, I'm going to have a little bit of a backup that I'm going to try to be getting through. That's kind of the weird mad science that goes on behind the scenes of our Q&A doc.
I mean, I'm not opposed to a 3-hour Q&A, Marty. We'll just have to start an hour earlier because I need to go help put my kids to bed here in a few minutes, but
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
opposed to it. We can do what we need to do.
Well, when I'm on the East Coast, I'm opposed to it. Eastern time.
Also,
I'm
you say you want
worthless.
the live questions, but then I give you the live questions and you're like, oh my gosh, Brent put
So
this in here because I
hard.
hate this question.
They're so hard though. The live questions I don't get to prepare, but that's what
Yeah.
makes them good. It just
Well,
means I
but
have to
then
be
the
like,
document wasn't working, and so I'm trying to put in passages and you don't have it. So, when we're back at home and we're under normal circumstances, maybe we can do something.
blame the Hilton internet.
Yeah. Hotel Wi-Fi is an easy scapegoat.
You know it.
All right. Well, we are back next month, May 21st, with Josh Bosse. That should be fun. As Marty said, we've got some questions that we've been holding back that we think Josh is particularly suited to respond to and wrestle with and think about. So we're excited to see what he brings to the table. Marty's in Salt Lake City right now at the beginning of the Wild Wild West tour. You can check the news page on the BEMA site or the schedule page on Marty's site and see all the places he's going to be. I'll be at a couple of them. We love meeting you guys, so hope to see you all there.
Absolutely.
I think that's it, Marty.
Okay, I think we're good. Sorry for being so late, everybody.
Bye.